If you're new in town or just new to this whole podcast thing, you're tuning in to Lore by Night, the podcast that discusses all things vampiric with no fear of breaching the Masquerade. In this episode, we begin to unravel the mysteries behind the origins, motives, and cultures of the 16 ghostly guilds in the world of darkness. This episode will focus on the Artificers Guild, the Inhabit Arcanos, and the art of Soulforging. There you are! I was wondering where you've gotten to. I was beginning to think you had enough of us at the Phoenix Institute. Many of us do wander off at some point or, face the lethal oops, wink wink, but I believe what you and I have is rather special. We truly have built a special relationship over the last year, haven't we? Glad you agree, because it means you have the privilege of learning the deeper and darker histories of the guilds. We at the Phoenix Institute hold these secrets very dear, as if word gets out how we know these secrets and that we know them at all, not only will our mortal competitors hunt us down, but so too will the undead equivalents. It's a miracle, really, they haven't knocked us down like a house of straws in a hurricane already, but no doubt they have their reasons to keep us around. That, or we're just extremely lucky. Anywho, with all this talk of building and knocking down things, perhaps we should start with the guild that knows all too well about creating things, the Artificers Guild. The Artificers are perhaps the oldest guild in Stygia, but definitely older than their signature Arcanos, Inhabit. That said, we understand that Inhabit is indeed the oldest Arcanos. It is also the Arcanos that has changed the most throughout history. It was originally called Kinesis until the advent of modern technology. It was eventually replaced with Inhabit. As technology evolves, so do the younger artificers, challenging these potentials. Inhabit, as the name would imply, allows one to manipulate and control inanimate objects. They infuse their very essence in an object, attuning every conceivable inch of themselves to the object in question, learning how to animate its home, for lack of a better word. Artificers, be it one of the guild wraiths of the same name, or as a title for one so first in the Inhabit Arcanos, can eventually pour their very will into it, creating a form of artifact. Indeed, explorer! Artificers are very good at changing existing objects, imbuing them with new powers, creating relics and artifacts, or even making them come alive. As you can expect, Inhabit is a rather dangerous Arcanos. When it goes wrong, it really goes wrong. Becoming trapped and unable to manipulate an item, breaking it or shorting it out, or becoming overwhelmed by its power source are all potential problems when things don't go planned for an artificer. Whilst it is very easy to see if someone is an artificer should they pop out of their item of choice, be it a box, handbag, or an ATM machine, or see someone hammering away at a forge, but is there a way of determining one in the flesh, so to speak, outside of their habitats? Well, that is where guild marks come in. We have very briefly touched upon them, so now is a good time to probably talk about them. Practicing Arcanoses causes the race corpus to manifest guild marks, which are permanent changes to their appearance or behaviour that stem from the use of those arts. As of the Arcani themselves, guild marks once were badges of guild membership, but as they became more common practice, more races began displaying them. Remember, it is the Arcanos itself, not any sort of guild affiliation or initiation, that creates these marks. Many that specialize in the Inhabit Arcanos have been marked or perhaps even charred with reddish patches. Depending on the artificer in question, this can come from their work at Soulforges, which we will discuss in further detail tonight, or strange circuit board patterns. However, some evidence we have collected actually suggests that these are more general. The marks mimic the objects they inhabit. Some might even smell of said object or vehicle or machine. For example, someone who spent a lot of time around cars might be covered in glowing red-hot tire tracks with the smell of grease beneath their fingers. With the computer example from before, you can almost imagine the binary codes run through the artificer's eyes when they converse with the shadow, for example. But what about the artificers themselves? Well, Despite their age, the guild goes by many names: the Right and Honourable Brotherhood of Artificers, Soulforgers and Gremlins, the Society of the Hammer, which was their original name, the United Smiths of Stygia, and my personal favourite, the Hammer Boys. The oldest and more conservative of its members refer to themselves as the Brothers of the Forge, whilst the younger members call themselves Artificers and Hammer Boys. Some speculate whether those titles are assigned by gender, but I honestly don't believe they would find such things important. It is debated that some of these nicknames are actually the titles of particular factions. It is said that the Hammer Boys specialise with the Soulforging. Wrench Wraiths are meant to be masters of inhabiting machinery, with Ghost Riders being the ones who take on larger transportation machines. These ones are said to be allied with the Harbingers Guild. The Gremlins, however, are the more mischievous ones who use their Inhabit powers for malevolent purposes. The Artificers are considered one of the great high guilds, providing services for Stygian society to operate. The guild, as we talked about previously, holds the monopoly over Soulforging and the literal foundations of Stygia. They are, therefore, some of the most open about their practices. But how exactly did this guild come into being? To answer that riveting question, we have to go back to the very beginning, starting with Nudri, who is arguably the most well-respected and well-known wraith after Charon and the Lady of Fate. The enigmatic Nudri was an ancient wraith rescued from the labyrinth by Charon sometime around the 3rd century BCE. Nudri brought with him the secrets of Soulforging, the skill to convert wraithly plasm into useful items. During the expansion of the Roman and Stygian empires, Nudri started hiring a trio of apprentices for himself, knowing full well he couldn't keep up with Charon's demands by himself. He had to choose them carefully, very carefully, as they had to have unmistakable artistic talent, indomitable will, and total callousness to condemn souls to eternity as inanimate objects. Interestingly, there are no records we could collect that would suggest the title of apprentice in this instance being a true title prior to the 11th century. Anyway, these were the 3 ancients who would form what would subsequently become the Artificers Guild, later speculated to be destroyed with the breaking of the guilds for swearing fealty to Nudri, not Charon. These were Astrageon, Caius Jophius, and Ravit Bat Yosef, whose names I probably mispronounced horribly. Nudri was concerned that the Free's callousness would cause them to feed the soul fires too frequently, and he felt some restraint was needed. Despite the horrific nature of Soulforging, he is allegedly not one of the Shadow Eaten, which to say he is not a spectre. The Soulforging rites he would create were meant to not only educate, but help initiate, appreciate, and respect the dark knowledge. These teachings and discipline were enforced with Soulforge rites, which is ultimately a combination of mystical, theatrically, and practicality instruction as to the true nature of Soulforging, in order to warn apprentices of the dangers of taking things too lightly. Nudri would have the 3 would place their hand above the primal soul fire until their hand was as hard as any wraith they would toss into the fires. Nudri would force them to hammer a piece of their own corporeal flesh into a coin that each apprentice would wear round their neck, as a reminder as to what they would do and put each wraith through, making this quite a spiritual practice, in a sense. Nudri believed this would work with his 3 apprentices, but as more and more work came in, each one more demanding than the last, Nudri would have to let his 3 have apprentices of their own, and leave the 3 to look after themselves and their apprentices, provided they followed a list of rules, regulations, ceremonies, etc. for them to follow. When this was done, Nudri had lost interest in the apprentices, believing them to be capable of following his orders. These instructions are said to be collected in something known as the Book of Nudri. Now, we haven't done any extracts, unfortunately, but the legitimacy of such a tome existing has been questioned many times, as there is much evidence to suggest that this was actually written in the 1960s, but you can make up your own mind once you've conducted your own thorough research. The ancient three, replacing their names with Ferum, Smoke, and Makabar, would form the foundations of the Artificers Guild and began what was often been cited as a comical race against each other to gain more followers under their own banners. Realizing the leadership roles meant power, passing on their teachings to their apprentices as the legions exploded in numbers. Of course, with their attention focused mainly on power, not enough care was put into the training, and of course, this showed with flimsy results. When Nudri learnt of these feelings, he would take to the streets of Stygia and take his hammer to those who sullied his craft and lay havoc on them. Some 50 guild members were taken to Nudri's own forge, which he had previously locked himself away for 100 years, and melted them down. Those that didn't quietly leave the guild actually applied to themselves. The ancient three, however, learnt their lesson. That event would later be called the Day of Nudri's Rage, so one could imagine the destruction Nudri left in his wake. The next few centuries would bring about the proto-guilds and the major guilds that would remain tonight. The guilds wanted power and control over their secrets, fighting amongst themselves in the shadows, a violent long conflict called the War of the Guilds, which we discussed previously. Whilst one of the intentions was to make the artificers weak, it made them stronger. This arrogance of the guilds, but mainly the artificers wanting to overthrow them. It backfired. Jaron disbanded the guilds only to quietly withdraw said actions after 20 years. Some guild members joined the legions, whilst others went back to what they were doing. The ancient three disappeared or were killed, whatever you wish to speculate, and a new, not-so-old three replaced them. They are Lord Embers, the Master of Apprentices, Lady Alias Capet, Keeper of the Chain, and Hugh Gannon, Guardian of the Forge. These second three are the ones deciding the guild's directions, including the torn direction during the Great War, which led to a surprisingly neutral stance on the whole thing, before caving in with the loyalists, if my notes here are to be trusted. These second three, dressed in black robes and masks, led to quite important roles as they lead this ancient guild into more modern settings, forming quite the artisan society of an organization fit with the feudal stirring and stains. Together, they perform the initiation for each of the new apprentices. The Master of Apprentices directs the training of each of the artificers, if not personally, but via the dictation of the course of each apprentice. The Keeper of the Chain steers the course with the Cult of Nudri, which has quite the vocal presence in the guild, referring to the wraith of the question of its namesake. The Guardian of the Forge is the master of the soulfire and allegedly stares into any other soulfire by looking into it. The most skilled of artificers, besides these three and of course Nudri, are who sometimes known as Forge Masters or Master Forgers, though that second one sounds like something a little naughty. Anyway, these skilled individuals are scattered about the Legion and Necropoli the world over, serving and helping lesser artificers however they can. Those who primarily occupy the Isles of Sorrows, which I believe make up about 37 of them, are the Council of Masters, though several hundred do appear when matters of the guild as a whole need to be discussed. In such scenarios, the second three would be present also, who are younger than most of the Council Masters in age. Despite this, the Council only deal with master-class artificers that dwell in the city and control the fates and the assignments of the Journeymen. And who are the Journeymen? Well, regardless of the name, the Journeymen cover all genders and those races that wish to lack one. They, the Journey people, have passed the Soulforge rite, served their apprenticeships, and be deemed their very own forge in smaller necropoli, military units, and intelligence gathering services. If they are electronics experts, more praise for them because that is a particularly difficult endeavour indeed. Journeymen often have 3 apprentices at various stages of their training in their care. The more you get through the rites, the higher your status is deemed to be. It is in the apprentice's best interest to do well for their master, mistress, or mistress, depending on the gender or indeed lack of one, of the journey person in question. The shame is indeed quite heavy. As for the apprentices themselves, these are members of the guild who lack their own forge and therefore have to go through the Soulforge rites. They are the beck and call of the teachers, and their apprenticeships can take up to 50 years, though we have found that an apprenticeship that long is most rare. The usual amount by our research is 3 to 5 years. It is also rare for members of the guild to turn their backs on the guild. They will do business with pretty much any wraith. Apprentices usually get a slap on the wrist if they don't know enough to cause damage, but anything above and beyond that, well, mercy is not part of the Artificer vocabulary. Remember, they are trained to be callous with their work. Many of these runaways, for lack of a better phrase, travel with the renegades who have an interesting relationship with the guild, or rather, the guild has an interesting relationship with the renegades. By their very existence, they are a renegade group. It opposes Charon at his will, yes, but the Artificers, as we've discussed, are structured firmly around tradition and hierarchical structure, so tearing down the establishment is not their thing. If anything, it is building things up. Some members of the Artificers are associated with renegade groups and are a bit looser in regulation of their abilities, particularly those who are more computer-focused with their skills. Heretics, on the other hand, generally don't believe the Artificers exist, from our research at least. The guild's age has given them an arrogance that constantly annoys the spooks, haunters, and usurers, mainly the older wraiths of said guilds. The Artificers are said to respect the Pardoners the most for both offering the skills that Stygia cannot live without. Less so with the Harbingers and Oracles, though the future-seeing talents of the Oracles makes their relationship a bit wary one. As for the Alchemists, what the expressions you millennials say, it's complicated, but that is a conversation for another time. Something else that is seen as a complicated procedure is the sacred art of soulforging, or at least sacred to the Artificers. It is very much their thing, something that existed long before the Arcanos of Inhabit, as we discussed already. It is a moment of supreme power for the smith to turn a person into an inanimate object. It also perhaps the most dehumanizing one could do, turning the already dehumanized wraith, slave, into furniture, weapons, or any brick of the many new roads. It is work that has to be done, the smiths tells themselves, that most trying to be merciful and get the job done with as little pain as possible. Seems a strange sentence for me to say, given it involves melting down someone, but as many a smith would think, if it wasn't them, someone else would do it. Some believe that when these items and artifacts break down, their souls leave shadowless, allowing them to transcend, which puts quite the painfully positive twist on things. Whilst this is very unlikely to be true, you could imagine some being a little curious. Of course, there are some, as Nudri didn't want, who abuse the form and enjoy it. Some enjoy the torment, but this is the minority from what we at the Phoenix Institute has learnt at least. As for the process, the corpus is held over, not in the flames of pure pathos, until the outlines of the wraith to be melted down glows and begins to sag, preventing them from entering a harrowing. When it softens enough to be deemed malleable without the risk of dissolution, the wraith is placed onto the smith's anvil via taunts and is hammered with a specially made instrument of Stygian steel. The ordinary stuff of the underworld doesn't work, whatever that may be. The corpus is hammered and reheated as many times as needed until the final form has been reached, while special additives such as Death Ore, or Raw Oblivion as it is occasionally called, are being added. These things often need to be heated too, as one would naturally expect. Our researchers told us that this can be dangerous as any labyrinthian material often acts unpredictably. When this is all done to the smith's satisfaction, the newly forged object is dunked into a bucket of liquid plasm, which cools and hardens instantly. If they are not cooled off, the item is brittle and often breaks. Many non-guild smiths do not know this. As fascinating as I personally find all this, I can see that it has left you a little unnerved. I am not surprised, as most feel a little groggy after hearing that. It is truly barbaric, especially when the soul forging to them is some holy sacred art. The Artificers Guild are dangerous and powerful fanatics, dear explorer, but are a necessary evil in the underworld. Even those that don't have such a holy appreciation are taught someone in what is all, for all intents and purposes, the fires of hell for creating raw materials while twitching is something to fear. Even if you don't have this knowledge as I do, wouldn't you think twice about getting on the wrong side of an artificer? They could hide and sabotage your car, or turn you into a lamp or something without much warning. To be kept updated, follow the Law by Night VTM Twitter and Instagram pages to find out when we upload each episode. You can also find out by subscribing to the YouTube channel and clicking on the little bell, and you'll be immediately notified when the latest episode is live. Until next time, farewell.